Good evening, everyone. My name is John, and I'm the event coordinator here at Madeleine Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are here, of course, in Treaty 1 territory, and the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Inuit, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, of course, Madeleine Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are here this evening to celebrate the Winnipeg launch of the Book of Records, the eagerly awaited 9 years in the making new book from the one and only Madeleine Thien. We are enormously grateful to Knopf Canada for helping to make this evening a possibility, and to our friends at Plume Winnipeg, formerly the Winnipeg International Writers Festival, for collaborating on this event. You'll be hearing from Festival Director Madeleine Thien at the close of the evening. We are thrilled to have Thien with us tonight, as it's safe to say we are enormous fans. Her latest, The Book of Records, somehow exceeds the ludicrously high bar set by her previous works. It's a novel steeped in time slippage, touching on fate, faith, the migratory nature of humanity, and so very much more. It's a true tour de force, or in the words of James Glick, The Book of Records is capacious. Something so small should not be able to hold so much, and it is beautiful. An elegy of death and remembrance, of forgetting and of life. I am enthralled by this book and amazed, which are very, very true words. Just to give you a sense of what will happen this evening, there will be a conversation that will take place just to my left, as you all beg me to leave so that you can listen to these two folks actually talk about the book. That will be followed by questions from you folks out in the audience, so please do allow those to percolate over the course of the evening. When it comes time for the Q&A, I will approach you with this handheld microphone in a non-threatening fashion, which ensures that those watching at home can hear the questions. But now it's my immense pleasure to introduce both of our participants this evening. The creator of the Book of Records, Madeleine Thien, is the author of the story collection Simple Recipes and 3 previous novels. Certainty, Dogs at the Perimeter, Do Not Say We Have Nothing. Do Not Say We Have Nothing was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, the Women's Prize for Fiction, and the Folio Prize, and won the Governor General's Literary Award for Fiction, among other honors. Her books have been translated into 25 languages, and her stories and essays have appeared in the New Yorker, Granta, Times Literary Supplement, the New York Review of Books, and elsewhere. As a librettist, she created Chinatown, a full-length opera by Alice Ping-Yihu and Paul Yee, and collaborates on a range of chamber works. In 2024, she received the Writers' Trust Ingle Findlay Award, honoring a writer in mid-career. Born in Vancouver, Madeleine lives in Montreal and teaches part-time at Brooklyn College at the City University of New York. I'll interrupt just for a moment to let you know if you would like to sit down, there are plenty of chairs over here, so just as a caveat. A world-class author requires a superlative host, and we have that tonight in spades. We're thrilled to have Jenny Heijun Wills with us tonight to guide us through a conversation following, to guide us through a conversation. The procedure has changed since these notes were written. Jenny Heijun Wills is professor of English at the University of Winnipeg, where she teaches creative writing and critical race studies. She is the author of 2 brilliant books of creative nonfiction, Everything and Nothing at All, a finalist for the Writers' Trust Western Nonfiction Prize in 2024, and Older Sister Not Necessarily Related, which won the award in 2019. I feel very selfish that I'm being paid to listen to these 2 talk tonight, so I'm so pleased you're all here to join me in that. Please give an enormously warm welcome to
Thank you so much, John, to Plume, to McNally, and most of all, already in typical Asian event style, I'm having like an eyelash malfunction, so if I take them off midway through, it's getting good. Okay. I am so beyond humbled and thrilled and overjoyed to have been invited to shepherd the celebration of the Book of Records at its Winnipeg launch. Of course, Madeleine Thien is one of the most decorated writers in the world of literature, But tonight is particularly special because this astoundingly complex and gorgeous and innovative book arrives in the throes of Asian Heritage Month. Perhaps some of you know, but those of you who do not, Pan-Asian kinship and community is such a beautiful anti-imperialist expression and something we feel in our blood and our bones. We have been waiting a long time for this book, but not in the shady way that I feel John would say. It's like with his full chest, like it's all that we have been waiting a long time for this book, but waiting with the understanding that one must be patient, because as we are familiar with the trajectory of Madeleine Thien's writing career that already started off with brilliant and moving work, each text has been more riveting, more complex, more disruptive than the last. And it takes so much, it takes a long time to produce something better than what is already so clearly the best. But as a forever reader of Madeleine's work, I can tell you, you have seen nothing like this gorgeous new novel. Early on, a character says, and I'll quote from the text, as awkward as that is in front of a writer, "The only way to really remember is to forget everything and let time fill that story up, to reach in through a different doorway. Things have to inhabit the living or else disappear from the world and cease to exist. If things survive, it's not through abstract thought, but the realities that gave rise to those thoughts." This feels as though it is the thesis to this work, and a statement I think encapsulates how inviting and provocative this novel truly is. I think the first thing that many readers will notice that this is a novel that is somehow both extremely contemporary or futuristic, but also historically grounded. Reading into setting markers, our first-person guide, the now retrospective Lina, I think comes from a time in the future to this world in which we now live, and yet guided by three storytelling friends and the liminal sea space in which at 14 years old, she once found herself, we are also thrown into the worlds of Hannah Arendt, Spinoza, and the poet Du Fu. I'd heard of 2 out of 3 of those figures. And so I wonder if you might introduce us to this cast of characters, both based on historical figures and otherwise.
Thank you so much. Actually, you're the first person to put your finger on that particular line. And yes, it does sort of, it is the seed for everything that follows.
Oh my God,
I just want to start by saying how happy I am to be here. It's been a long time since I've been back in Winnipeg, and the light is beautiful. And I hear there's some kind of big hockey game later. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Jenny, for doing this. It really means a lot. Should I project more, or it's okay? Yes, there are 3 figures whose presence looms large in the novel. One is the 20th century political philosopher Hannah Arendt. Born in 1906, she came from a German Jewish family. She studied with Martin Heidegger and famously had an affair with him when she was 19. She became stateless in 1933, had to flee Germany and find safe passage eventually to America, an odyssey that took about 12 years. Baruch Spinoza, 17th century philosopher, born in Amsterdam. His family were Portuguese Jews who had fled. He was excommunicated at the age of 23 and had to leave the Jewish community and remake his life. I think we'll get into Spinoza a bit. His most famous work is called Ethics. And finally, the poet Du Fu, a Tang Dynasty poet, 8th century China, considered the greatest Chinese poet who ever lived, wrote, or we have still in our collective literature, 1,400 poems by Du Fu. He came of age at the height of the Tang Empire, the most cosmopolitan, sophisticated, cultured, wealthy, territory-grabbing empire of China at that time. And he was in his 50s when the empire collapsed, in a civil war that would disappear or displace a third of the population of China. Displace every person and disappear a third. And so they come together in this novel.
Mm-hmm. And the way that they come together, it's very early on, this isn't a spoiler, is through being these collective, being recounted, I guess, by a group of neighbors that the main character, who's a teen at the time, meets, and they have these discussions, these philosophical discussions, with certain themes that run throughout. But what triggers these conversations is that this main character, Lina, has these books that, or a couple of books, a few books, that are these sort of historical accounts of particular voyagers or historical figures. And in an early section, another character jokes about an inferior set of biographical textbooks, unlike the ones that are Lina's like prized and practically sole possessions. The lesser books series, we're told, groups together this motley crew of Machiavelli, Hegel, and Genghis Khan in one volume. This is such a tongue-in-cheek moment in the text. And so sort of expanding on your summary of these three historical figures, I wonder if you could tell us, how did you come to Du Fu, Arendt, and Spinoza as inspirations, and what was the process like learning and also imagining parts of their lives?
Yes, I'll begin by saying that they belong to a girl who's 7 years old at the beginning, and her and her father have to leave their home. And the father plucks from the shelf 3 books in a moment of chaos. And they're 3 books from this series that's called The Great Lives of Voyagers. They all have a blue cover. They all start with a quote from Seneca. They're for teenagers, about quote unquote great lives. And for the next 7 years, these are the only 3 books that Lina has. So they become her world, her education. She infuses them with life and curiosity. They end up in an enclave called the sea, a place they hope they won't stay for long. It's part of their trajectory on the way to hopefully stability. So when I was writing, all I knew at the beginning was that there was this father and daughter, that there was a girl who longed for an education, and that they lived in what her father told her was a building made of time. So that was my roundabout way back to your question about how it ended up being these 3. I wanted to write about the ideas that had lived in me for a long time, for decades. The writers and thinkers who I had first encountered when I was young, and that I kept coming back to for reasons I never completely understood. And the way those figures become companions. And I think I started writing in 2016, this book. And I think it was a moment that I really started to ask myself, why did I believe the things I believed? Why did I hold dear the things that I hold dear? what was inside me that I couldn't really see. And I kind of wanted to look at that question, you know, the good and the bad. There's so many ideas that we carry that we don't know the source of them. And I wondered what were the source of my ideas, and maybe what wasn't I seeing about what I carried. So many books or figures and thinkers I thought would live in this enclave, but those are the three who just stayed. There were others I wanted to stay, but they didn't want to stay. No, actually, it wasn't up to me. It was up to them. Something. It just wasn't the place for them. Yeah, they had other things to do. Yeah.
Well, I might skip ahead to a question that I think, where did I put it? That I think follows that a little bit, and that is what thinkers stay with us, and the lives that they live and how they shift over time. Because, you know, I have to admit, aside from Lina's memory, I think she's telling the story back 50 years later or something, I remember, memory of her childhood. I was most entranced by the Hannah Arendt sections. And it brought me back to school days when we would sort of gossip about this hideous relationship, quite frankly, between Martin Heidegger and in grad school, because it's such a terrible place, we saw Hannah Arendt as like the +1 to Martin Heidegger, who's like this rotten person. Anyway, I mean, it's not a secret, right?
It's definitely, I'll just add one thing about that. It's kind of devastating to read about this relationship, because she truly loved him.
Yes.
And she fell in love with him when she was his student, she was 19. And the early part of the relationship, we only have his letters, because she saved them. She carried them on that 12-year odyssey out of Germany across the ocean, and he did not keep her letters. So we don't have that part of we don't have her voice in those early years.
And I mean, it's early on in the book, but when you start to unfold her love, but also her disappointment in the relationship, it's very, very corporally felt. It's quite like erotic and beautiful, actually.
Yes.
But what I find juiciest about this, I think, that is in your novel, she is the center. And from what I recall, his name is only mentioned once. Everywhere else, he's just referred to as like the lecturer, which I feel is lovely. And you know, for those,
I just want to say I can hear John
I
giggling.
For those of you who maybe forget, who haven't yet encountered Arendt, one of her central theories was about the importance of bearing witness. And the act of bearing witness for Arendt was necessarily about vocalizing, I think, dissent against the status quo. So it's about like active bearing witness, I think. All of the characters in this book, I think, do this in their own way. But it also seems to me that you as a writer are also always doing this. And I wonder, and hearing the answer to the previous question makes me think about how this philosophy of actively bearing witness factors into your approach to writing and maybe just being.
I would probably do the fiction writer thing and hide in fiction, or answer it through fiction, because it's such a hard thing to observe about oneself. But to link to the Hannah Arendt part and the Heidegger part, I think one thing that the thing is, I would have preferred not to write about the Hannah Arendt Heidegger relationship, but in a way it was impossible, because it creates the ground for what she begins to think about love. Her love for Heidegger is very deep, and what she comes to is that relationship ends, to be picked up many years later, but it ends. Heidegger famously doesn't join the Nazi party, but carries out Nazi party orders or directives. But Hannah writes about what it means to be faithful to the act of loving, because of what it opens in a person, and what love creates in that person is something that we have a fidelity. In other words, when we love someone, it opens up something in ourselves, and there's a fidelity to that part of ourselves which is opened. And it becomes a part of the rest of her life's work. This question of love in the private world, whether love has a place in the political world, and what it means for the act of friendship. And you're right, so much of the book, in a way, tries to make real these philosophical and conceptual ideas, make them real in people's lives, make them real in the way we see people's relationships and friendships. And one of those is about love of the world and asking where the world exists. From her point of view, the world exists not inside me as an individual or inside you as an individual. It exists in this space between us. And we all have an obligation to this space between us. And every time we insert, that's her word, insert ourselves into the world, into this space between us, we are actively creating worldliness. So in the roundabout way, to answer your question, I do think about what it means to, when one makes the choice to enter that space that we share, that collective space, but it's a choice. It's not where we live. We live in private places. We live in social places. We live with our friends and loved ones. But there is another space that's the political space. And each time we step into it, it's a decision, a choice.
Absolutely. All right. You brought up hiding behind fiction. So I have a question about fiction. As a nonfiction writer myself, Lina's neighbours are always talking about the truth. The figures they discuss are also always trying to understand what is true. One character ponders, quote, a truth that was a fiction, yet true, unquote. And it reminds me of what I tell my nonfiction students, that our job is not to tell the truth, it's just not to lie. Somehow, I feel some of the same questions about ethics and representation that we have in nonfiction relate to historical fiction. So I'll ask you what everyone asks me. What are the ethics of representing another in literature?
Yes, I think it is the crucial question. And maybe one of the reasons why it always takes me such a long time. I think it's not just trying to create the world or the art of it, but in a way the art is inseparable from asking the question of why. Why? Because each act is a bit of a transgression. And I definitely felt that writing about Hannah Arendt, Dufour, Spinoza, and in even the ways that I borrowed from my own family history. You have this faith as a fiction writer that in the okay, well, let me try again. This is such a deeply researched novel. I tried to learn as much as I could possibly learn, and as much as I kind of had the capacity to learn, because I'm not a philosopher. But only when I had that very deep grounding could I feel that I could begin to imagine. And for me, that sense of spending as much time making sure that I absorb as much as possible before I begin to create has kind of always been my process. Because you're looking for that truth that emerges from the actual world. It's not the world that I want. It's not a world that I've made into a projection. It's not a world that's a fantasy. It's from as much as we can gather about the detail of the world. What is the truth? What are the truths that begin to show themselves? And I think one of the pleasures of writing about Spinoza was because he was very much interested in whether we could encounter truth in our very brief, very mortal, our mortal lives. And he comes to the conclusion that truths are very rare and very precious. And because they are so rare and precious, if you are lucky enough to hold one, you should share it. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question that follows this that is also about process. So the structure of the novel is quite complex, which also I think bespeaks our necessary patience for it. We have these historical sort of biographies or textbooks, however you want to understand them, informing and misinforming conversations, anecdotes, personal histories. We have retellings and remixes and inventions to make things more interesting at some point. We have stories on stories on stories basically going on here. How would you describe, I guess, the structure of this novel, and selfishly wanting to learn how so that I can copycat you myself? What is the process of creating an arrangement so complicated?
So it was 9 years of working on it, and I would say in year 7, I thought I would have to throw it away. I had been working on it for so long, and it really didn't work. There were so many beautiful pieces, but all together, it just didn't hold. And I was joking to a writer friend that it's like, I've made this kind of amazing structure that's made of paper, and I've learned how to walk inside it without the whole thing coming down. Like, I know how to climb the staircase without tipping it, but as soon as someone else enters it, it just and then something clicked. My partner is a writer, Rawi Haj, and every morning he would just sit with me and we would talk about the novel, piece by piece, and kind of rebuild it. The structure is a bit like when you look at the night sky and you see stars, and they're all different ages. Some are 10 billion years old, some are 100 billion years old, but to our eye, they're all the same age in a way, because they're all reaching our eye in this moment. It was about how to translate long time, large scale, into a plane, like a sheet of paper. That's the structure. So in a way, it's like, how can I bring these different centuries into one holding space, the way we in one moment look up at the sky and see this moment. It's a like transposing. It was a bit, if anyone plays music, I felt like I was transposing different keys, which were the different centuries, into one key.
Those are both really great and perfect analogies for what it feels like, I think, to experience this book too, because it's true, it's centuries that sort of separate, millennia that separate these characters, and yet they feel embraided, but not, but the differences in time don't feel overworked, if that makes sense. You know, sometimes you can see books that are like one character's in this century and that character's in that century, and then like the language is like so hyperbolically, outstandingly, I think, demarcating time. There are definite distinctions between the different third person and first person narrators going on here, but it never feels accosting, I guess.
Yeah, I think because the shifts in language are made by the temperament of the figure. Like Hannah is much more sardonic, much more bold, very witty, more joking, she's an insightful person, and to try to capture that, she's astute. And to try to capture that in the voice, that's, I think, what I was looking for in Spinoza. I don't know how to describe the Spinoza voice. Yes. They all have animals. They kind of help us along as well. Yeah.
Spinoza sections to me feel like soft bro energy. If that makes sense. Like he's kind of like charismatic and
He's
like
charismatic.
but also like a little bit emo and like but yeah, it's very different, but very beautiful. And of course, like Lina's first person it reminds me of some of your other writing so much, that sort of lyrical and beautiful writing.
Yeah, I think, one of the pleasures of writing it was that I was playing with this idea of where ideas come from, and that they don't come from the singular mind, they come from the world. And so a lot of their ideas, we see them at a younger age, before they write the works they're most famous for. And part of it is trying to build the world that will give rise to the questions that they are going to be devoted to for the rest of their lives. And a lot of those words, those ideas are actually in the mouths of other characters.
Yeah.
And then I kind of started to redistribute their ideas between each other, because they were such mirrors. It was kind of fascinating to take a thread that is actually a Spinoza thread and weave it through Dufu, and weave some of Dufu's poems through other times.
I can see, I'm sure we can all understand why it was such a I guess long-awaited piece, why so much thought goes into it. It's incredibly complicated, but also because it's so beautiful, it's so readable also. So I encourage you to read it. I will say I also listened to the audiobook.
Yes.
So that's, I think, where my Spinoza vibes are coming from a little bit as the actor in some ways.
Who narrated that?
It's 4 or 5 different people.
It's several actors.
Yes. Actually, I helped with the casting.
Oh wow.
Yeah, sometimes the voice, I was just like that. Yes.
Right, we'll chat a little bit later about the Spinoza. Okay, the last question, sort of full question that I have, and then I have famously from my colleague Lindsay Wong, I copied her idea of doing a lightning round of questions. If you folks are too shy to ask questions later, and that Madeleine has consented to before, don't worry. For many years, Asian Canadian and Asian American writers felt the need to write back against the ethnographic misrepresentations of our lives and our communities. This autoethnographic, very didactic style, while politically necessary, continues, I think, in a lot of ways to center outside readers, and largely white readers. Things have shifted so much in the last 10 to 15 years, I think largely because of writers like you, with books like this novel also, that are profoundly Asian, but also refusing the educational burden of telling what it's like to be racialized in one way or another. And so my final question for you is, what was your approach to thinking about Asian people, Asian community, Asian history in this work? And how is it maybe different from in earlier books?
It is different. Yeah. You know, in Do Not Say We Have Nothing, there's a book, there's a novel that the characters love. And they live in a time when there's certain things that just cannot be said. This is 20th century China. During the most difficult years, there's simply histories that go missing. And they try to hide these names and these lives inside a work of literature. And I think in a funny way, I switched it this time. There are real lives, Hannah Arendt, Defoe, Spinoza. But what's really happening, and as this girl, Lina, keeps the book of records, is she's used these figures to keep safe the story of her father, which is the story that's at the very center of the book. And it's a story about being a good person and making extraordinarily immoral choices. And it's about how much her father is the only family she has now. And she has this deep devotion to him, but she also doesn't know if she can forgive him. I think, to answer your question, I've always tried to find the way in which I can be true to this. For me, there's the East and West separation has never really mirrored my reality, because in me it's so intertwined. And I think maybe the most transgressive thing in this book is that I have made this 14-year-old girl who has this hunger for an education the inheritor of some of Europe's most beloved philosophers and China's greatest poet. Because I believe she also has to she carries the joy of the learning and the burden. And some of these ideas, let's say specifically with Arendt and Spinoza, are simply a part of our world, whether we're aware of it or not. It's so melded into ways of looking, seeing, ways of thinking about contemporary life, ways of thinking about truth and politics. There's a lot of Arendtian ideas floating around, and sometimes, and she's such a complex thinker that it's also ways in which all thinkers are used. Their ideas are instrumentalized. They're used to make this argument or that argument, and or hold a certain kind of space, sometimes for the good, sometimes not. I'm not sure where I was going. I guess I was just thinking out loud about what it is to live with the ideas that shape our contemporary reality, and how we're enacting them all the time. But I'll also add that maybe the most important thing for me, as we follow them through their lives, is that they all face in one way or another the total collapse of their world. And they have to choose what kind of friend, what kind of, what it is they want to carry into the future, even if they themselves might not survive. What kind of ideas, what kinds of realities are going to survive the present. And the only reason we have them is because other people saved them. And also because not everyone was saved and they took the place. I think it's most clear with Hannah Arendt. And it's something that grieves her, that if she survives, she will be the exception. And I think that's the thing to hold in mind, is that many were not saved. And we shouldn't just remember Hannah, we should remember the world that gave rise to the kinds of questions she felt compelled to ask for the rest of her life.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Folks, maybe a round of applause for the Madeleine Thien. How do we summon John and his magic microphone? Amazing. I knew it all along. I'm certain you folks have questions.
I have a comment and a question. You said something, and that's probably what I love about you, is your humility. But you said you're not a philosopher. I'd like to read what philosophy is. This is systematic study of fundamental questions about existence, knowledge, values, reason, mind, and language. Thank you. And my favorite question to ask any writer is, what books are you reading now? What books have you read lately that you love? Yeah, so if you could let us know that.
Yes, for different reasons, I was rereading Kenesia Lupin's Code Noir. It's really extraordinary. I actually want to write a long piece about it. I think it's such a complex, it's demanding, but it's so groundbreaking in form, in ambition, in love. I would say love.
It's on reorder.
It's really quite amazing. But it should be read slowly. And then I read this beautiful work by Lina Axelson, a Sami writer. It's called Ednan. It's a novel in verse. It spans the 20th century. It's absolutely phenomenal.
What's her name?
Lina Axelson. She's Swedish and Sami. And I actually had heard so much about this novel that I got it from the library. And then I got it at the library and I opened it and I was like, where's all the words? Because it's in like very short verses, triplets and couplets. I thought, oh, I don't know if I know. Then I just started and it was so incredible. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. I think the first remark you made was that the impetus for this book was you wanting to sort some things out and take a look at some of the things you believed and question them and so on. So my question is, did that happen?
Mm-hmm.
And second of all, if it did happen, did it make you feel better? Did it make you feel happier?
I think, one thing the book is still very new. in the world. And I think one of almost every pre-interview that happened, that like they're now on the phone or on Zoom, has ended up with me or the person or both of us in tears. There's something about watching the displacement that happens in this novel and the deep loyalties also that people hold on to, the fidelities that just reminds us, I don't know if I felt happy or more that I felt like, there's a famous Walter Benjamin essay that becomes important in the later part of the novel. It's his last essay, and he gave a copy to Hannah Arendt to carry. And she's one of the people that allows this essay to survive into the future because he doesn't make it. And it's the famous line, what you'll probably do, the emergency, I'm gonna misremember it. I am gonna misremember it. I'll just put it in my own words because I can't remember his exact, but that the emergency before us was always here. And I think that's what the novel has partly made clear to me. It seems like it's about moving through time, but one of the things that became clear to me as I was writing was that everything I was writing, someone being uprooted, someone falling in love, someone being pushed out of their community, it was happening to someone right this moment. Everything that seemed of the past was someone's reality in this very moment, somewhere on this place, in this earth. And it's not a novel that travels through time so much as it's a novel where time travels through us. And so, yes, sorry, this is a long-winded way to answer your question that I think I did. I went back to my old teachers and had to ask myself, what is it actually that I have learned? Or what is it that I believe I've learned? And I think that it feels like, for me, a clearing of the ground for future work. It felt to me like I wanted to face, I'm 51, there's something about finishing a novel at the age of 50 that did feel like trying to gather what was so that I would know how to continue.
I don't really have a question about it. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate, as a reader, how much I appreciate you and the things that you write about reading. I carry around in my head a quote that I can't even remember what somebody was complaining about, what Jenny talked about, that you didn't give enough information for us Western writers about whatever you were talking about in the book. And you had a quote about, you sort of gently chastised the writer saying, the world is large, dear reader. And I've really taken that to heart, and I'm a much broader and more adventuresome reader than I was before I met you through your books. And I just want to say thank you.
There's an epigraph to Do Not Sway of Nothing that I often think of because it also reminds me, it's a very lovely, almost casual line where they say, oh God. It's that moment, when you have it and then you just blank because you.
Oh, wait until you're 75.
Yeah. I'll have to misquote it because I don't remember the exact words again, but that we have this one life, or these two, I think it's two people talking, we have these two lives, but how with these two lives, but just how many lives can we know, or something along those lines, yeah. It's much better in the original.
I'm curious, as someone who's done a little bit of translating, what the experience is like of having your fiction translated. I don't know how many languages you yourself know, but what's it like, yeah, having it translated into a different language that you know or another language that you don't know? What does that feel like for you?
I love translation. I would say a lot of my reading of literature is translation. I can only really read the French. And I think I felt this very strongly with my first book, Simple Recipes, how much I recognized something deep that felt deeper than language. That I felt I recognized it when I read the French, but I didn't know how that was possible. Exactly. And I think I always believe that it's the translator's work. I do think it's a new work of art. And I tend not to, unless they want my involvement, I tend to be very hands-off because I do feel like it is a creation that belongs to them. And I really appreciate the writers who are lucky enough to get multiple translations of their work of the same book, because I really like to sometimes read them in the multiple translations. It's a little known fact that the very first translator of Spinoza, who wrote in Latin, who wrote his philosophical works in Latin, the first translator of Spinoza into English is George Eliot. And it was not published. It is now published, but it was in her papers.
Was there a dramatic final question from the audience?
I want the lightning round.
Shall we move to vote?
Are you ready? And the rule that I'll remind you of, because you're so thoughtful and considerate, is there's no thinking aloud. Philosopher as you are. So the lightning round is basically just 10 sort of quick questions, sort of related to literature stuff, that they're just like weird questions or silly. They're not too deep. Are you ready? Are you ready?
I think everyone should shout out an answer.
All right. Nice chat. All right. Music or silence when writing?
Music.
Dog ear or bookmark?
I'm not thinking. Dog ear.
Audiobook, yay or nay?
Yay.
Do you judge a book by its cover?
No.
Best celebrity memoir or one you want to read?
Jackie Chan.
Ruffle page or crisp edges?
Crisp edges.
What's scarier, reading reviews or watching your own interviews back?
Reading reviews.
Literary heroes?
Oh. You know what I was going to say. Oh, I was going to say Alice Munro.
Fictional character you wish you'd invented?
That's a good question.
If I can't remember the name of the story, it's a Borges story where it's the playwright who is about to die. And he's given a year to finish a play by God in his mind. And that is an amazing story. Yeah.
Last question. Dream book cover color?
Pink.
Same. Thank you so much, Madeleine Thien.
That was so fun.
I get one little minute to close things off. Let's just pause for a second though, because I think this was one of the most heart-lifting, intriguing conversations that I've had a chance to hear for a long time. I feel like I'm walking out of here with so many slow blooming ideas just taking shape. And I was thinking momentarily, I made myself some notes, going like, oh my God, I want to mention that, I want to mention that. What I am here thinking at the end, Madeleine, is your sense about everything coming sort of through the characters, through the writer, and how it connects with your idea of what do we carry and what is between us. And I feel like we just got to watch this extraordinary conversation between two people who think, two people who write, two people who read and read the world so carefully and so generously. It was just an absolute delight and honor to hear it. So let's do something. We also might want to signal our general appreciation, though we could not hear it. We could tell when John was giggling because these guys would giggle because John's giggling. So, John, you want to take your bow? I do want to acknowledge, though, this extraordinary place where we get to gather for these conversations, where we get to be in company with one another, where we get to be in the presence of all these stories, all these voices, which are also measuring and carrying so many kinds of worlds in each of them. McNally Robinson makes this city such an important place to live. Their events coordinator is a bit rascally. Yes, Madeleine is now going to sign books, so you may meet her over here. And I'm supposed to tell you that there's going to be probably John, I think, because his handwriting is legible, making notes on stickies so that Madeleine can get your name spelled right. I did not offer to do this because I can't read my writing, and that would just be a kind of indignity to Madeleine to have to say, what even is this? So take a minute to get your name properly registered before you show up here. And the other rule around here, which is weird, but you have to pay for the book before you can leave the store. It's like that. One more round of applause for Jenny.